well for a structure fire. Wasn't adequate water. So we added a tanker bay onto that. And some of the individuals that you see in that picture are members of the county government, as well as working in different businesses. So in that picture is Sam Alexander, who used to be the clerk of court. You've got Pop Hedge standing on the second pumper to the right, who ran Hedge's restaurant. So I know that I'm dating myself in here. My father's in there, Harvey Rogers is in there, Sam Brooks is in there, Mr. Maslock is in there, Bill Kusenberry is in there. So that's what our fire service looked like today. Those two Ford pumpers cost about $16,000. Do you have any idea what a pumper costs today? $800,000. Wow. An aerial is over $1 million.
Oh, you're looking for new. Okay.
Yeah, I'm talking about new. Exactly. Very, very quick. So if you take a look at this, they were very active, and it was right on US 1. I'm going to show you what the building looks like next. Excuse me. This particular slide here talks about some of the leaders and shakers that were on the Falmouth Fire Department. On your handout, it may be a little difficult to read them, but you'll see that there are a number of folks in there that were very prominent in Stafford County. You'll see T. Benton Gale. Some of you may remember that name. He ran the school system for a number of years. You'll see Bill Bolton's name on that, who was a prominent lawyer in Fredericksburg area and did a lot of work for us. So the top line, next slide please. This is the group of charter members, and if you take a look at that, you'll see that there are a number of prominent names in that list of charter members of folks who have since gone past, but were very instrumental in running Stafford County and making things happen. Next slide, please. Okay, this picture here is a picture of our first custom unit. It was a 1959 C-grade on a GMC chassis. And this particular unit cost a little over $20,000. And the guy sitting behind the wheel is my father, Willie Shelton Sr., and the other two gentlemen, Johnny Maslock, the fire chief, Lindy Colbert, and O.G. Powell. But that was the first custom unit that we bought in Stafford County. And as I said, it cost a little under $20,000. My father co-signed the note. And he says, I don't know how we'll ever pay for this. So, next slide, please. You may recognize this building today. It's on US 1 on Cambridge Street.
Access I.
Access I, you're exactly right. But Access I was originally the home of Falmouth Volunteer Fire Department. And I want to give you a little bit of history. The part of the building to the right was a Stafford Supply, and before that it was Pop Hedge's restaurant. Had the best cheeseburgers in the whole state. Mom and Pop Hedge. And they lived right across the street. So in 1964, we pretty much exhausted the capability of that 24 by 50 building, and the infrastructure had gone south on us. So Jesse Atkins was contracted to rebuild the building. The building part to the left was all brand new, 3 drive-through bays, and then the Stafford appliance on the right and the old Hedges restaurant was modified. And I'm going to scare you with what it cost to build this building. $22,000. Now try building a chicken coop in Stafford County today for $22,000. First you got to get through planning and zoning. So as we take a look at this, as I said, Jesse Atkins donated a lot of time. They hauled a lot of dirt away from there. But that stayed in operation from 1965 to 1982. And of course, from that point on, we built a new station on Butler Road. So think about the aspect. Falmouth Fire Department at this time was 5 stations. Falmouth, Mountain View, Brook, Hartwood, and White Oak. So we had 5 stations that were under the auspices of Falmouth Fire Department. The only other one was to the north of us at Stafford. And then, of course, later on, Widewater and some of the others came online. Next slide, please. Now, this gives you a depiction of the building in full operation. You'll note those 2 tankers. One of them was 3,000 gallons of water. We started getting big in residential occupancies then, and we needed more than 255-gallon water tanks. So we bought tankers and we ran tanker shuttles. So a couple of those were monumental in saving a number of different buildings, as well as buildings in the city of Fredericksburg, county of King George, Spotsylvania, and Fauquier. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little more in depth about the history of Hartwood. Mark Dole has provided me a history of Mountain View, and Bill Shelton has provided me a history of Brook. But I didn't think we had 4 or 5 hours to stay here tonight, so it would probably take that long to go through that particular aspect. The Hartwood Volunteer Fire Department was created because of a disastrous fire in 1976. And most of our departments in the county were created because of major fires with fatalities. And some of you may remember this particular one was a Patton person that died right across the street from where the present station is now. The way it was set up, Hartwood was basically a partner with Falmouth Fire Department. Hartwood had to provide the building, Falmouth provided the apparatus and the protective clothing. So, back in 1976, you bought nothing new. Right, Bill? Everything was a hand-me-down from someone else, maybe a triple hand-me-down. So we didn't get to buy a whole lot of stuff today. As we take a look at firefighters today, self-contained breathing apparatus is somewhere in the area of $3,000 or $4,000 a unit. Protective clothing ensemble is roughly $2,000. Back then, they were $60, and breathing apparatus was about $200. So everything changes and everything goes up from that standpoint. The building in 1967 was constructed by the volunteers. That Hartwood community came together and built the building. Done all by volunteers. We dealt with a couple sawmills. We had a couple people that were electricians. We had some folks that were masons. So that's how we put the building together. As you can see, the first 2 pieces of equipment that Falmouth provided was a 1952 and a 1957. So mathematically, you can tell that those pumpers were anywhere from 12 to 15 years old before we got it. And that's the way we had to operate. That's the way the fire service operated at that time. How do we survive? Fundraising. You may remember years ago, bingo was big in the volunteer fire departments until the state got into the middle of it and you had to go through the accounting with bingo. But we had turkey shoots, we had spaghetti dinners, all kinds of stuff. Bill and them had fish fries and those things that raised the money for us to continue to operate. So that's what survival was all about. The county provided $1,000 for the operation stations. Do you know what our budget is for fire and rescue today? $37 million. Wow. $37 million. We've got a little over 220 career people, and in all probability, if all goes well, after Tuesday night, we should be going up to 250 which means that we're going to staff some of the stations that are not presently staffed. So that's going to be something we're going to try to embark upon in the near future, because as you take a look at EMS, if you have a heart attack, you got about 3 to 5 minutes before you croak, excuse the expression. So if we don't have a piece of apparatus or an ambulance on the scene quick enough, and historically we have had calls that we didn't get there with an ambulance for 30 minutes. So realize the fact that change is inevitable and your tax dollars are going to go up, but that's a fact of life. We're no longer that little teeny county of 10 to 12,000 people. We're hinging right now on 160,000 people. And this year we will exceed 18,000 responses. So mathematically calculate that out. That's a lot of movement. And about 70% of those calls are EMS related. So those ambulances that we've got at different places are moving all day and all night. So 1975, we got the first new pumpers. Would you believe that we bought 4 in the same year? They were all 1975. 2 were C800s, 2 were C900s. The 2 C900s had 1,000 gallons of water. The C800s had 750 gallons. And they went to Heartwood, Brook, Mountain View, and White Oak. But that's where we needed the water, because at that time, there were no lovely fire hydrants in White Oak. No lovely fire hydrants in Heartwood. Nope. None in Mountain View. None in Brook. So if you didn't bring the water in, you can't put the wet stuff on the red stuff. Okay, next slide, please. So as we moved on, we moved into 1982, and we bought what we call our first custom pumper. And that first custom pumper was a Hahn, made in Pennsylvania. Everything prior to that had been a hand-me-down. So again, we purchased that through Falmouth as well as Heartwood. Again, long hours in training and fundraising. And we also bought the first hazmat unit. And in 1989, Heartwood became an independent station. We broke away from Falmouth, as did the other 4, eventually becoming independent. We expanded the size of the station. And in 2000, we put the first ambulance in Heartwood, bought by volunteers, staffed by volunteers. And today, most folks don't realize that in order to become an EMT, you're looking at roughly 150 hours of training. Get a volunteer today to put in 150 hours of training is remarkable, right? And then on top of that, the crazy director of fire programs that worked for the governor made you take another 150 hours of firefighter 1 and 2 training. So you're looking at 300 hours to become that volunteer. And of course, since I retired from the state, they've added more hours to it. So it's very difficult for a volunteer. Quite honestly, I don't know how we would have survived in Stafford without volunteers, but today it becomes a little more difficult to do that. And as you'll see, the county purchased a new Pierce unit, a new tanker was added, the building was enlarged again. Next slide, please. So basically in 2012, we acquired 3 more acres for our septic field and drain field, and that was from Dr. Stewart Jones. Some of you may remember her. We share septic fields with Heartwood Presbyterian Church. So we take that stuff that both of us discharge and put it out in that large field. But we have a shared commodity. Now, could you do that today? Health Department wouldn't allow you to do that today, nor would the county. But basically then there was a gentleman or a ladies agreement that allowed you to do different things. And Dr. Jones was a major supporter of our fire department from the time it went in place in 1967. And the next few things just talked about some of the things that we did in the 2016, 17, 18 era. We started making changes with going to light emitting diode, LED lighting, to make enhancements to try to save money, because a fire station normally consumes about $1,000 worth of electricity a month. And now the county is paying for the electricity, the heat, the water, and all this, and all the volunteer stations. And they do give the volunteers a stipend to be able to work from. Next slide, please. All right, so let me talk to you a little bit about some of the fire stations, give you a brief history of those. Falmouth, as I said, was started in 1941, designated as Company 1. Stafford came online in 1962, and if you'll note, the land was donated by S.K. Young. Does that ring a bell to any of you? S.K. Young was a school teacher. He did industrial arts at Stafford High School, the high school that I graduated from. And there was only one high school at that time, and S.K. Young ran the vocational aspect. Whitewater came online in 1963, and the land was donated by the Marion Moncure family. If you watch this, you'll see that it looks like we're getting land from other people, not county purchasing. Company 4, land was donated by Gordon Byram. Brook, 1963, Station 5, land was donated by Earl Wilson. And in Hartwood, our land was donated by Dr. Stuart Jones, Sadie Patton, and Catherine Brady. Company 7 at White Oak, land was donated by the Fines family. And Rock Hill, 1976, Company 8, was donated by Rollin Heflin. And again, that was another name that was big in Stafford County's politics. Next slide, please. Rescue and Engine 9 was established in 1989 on land leased from Aquia Harbor.
Yeah, I remember that.
Potomac Hills, which was originally a substation or a satellite station of Whitewater, became a county-owned station and is county-operated today. Berea Station came online from land donated by Carl D. Silver, and it was the first all-career station in the county. And that's designated Company 12. Stafford Fire Department rebuilt, and I'll tell you why we rebuilt Stafford Fire Department. 25 years ago, I did a survey of the fire stations in the county. Fred Bannis, who was the director at that time, says, how about you, since you retired, go and do a survey on the condition of our buildings? And I did. And Stafford was in deplorable condition. Brook was in deplorable condition. And some of the others were not in good shape. Fortunately, Stafford was number 1 on the list because there'd been some innovative electrical work, innovative plumbing work in the building, and the roof just didn't seem to want to hold the weight of the rafters. So that got a priority. We're still hoping that we're going to do something with the other stations, especially Brook is in line. Rock Hill has had some renovations. We've done major renovations at Whitewater over the past few years. But we've still got to do something with all those owned buildings by the volunteers. Now, when we built Station 12, there that Carl Silver donated, we thought that was outrageous, $9 million. Well, if you take a look and come on down to Station 14 at Shelton Shop, you'll see that we put about $12 million into that building. Costs a lot. And that doesn't put the first piece of fire apparatus in there. Doesn't put the first firefighter in there. Doesn't put the first medic in there. All of that is all additional money. What we do is very expensive. But when you talk about first responders, you've got to have people that are adequately prepared, adequately trained, and adequately housed. Because they're there for 24 hours. 24 hours is a long time. Mark will tell you, Bill will tell you that 24 hours is a long time to be in a career position. Now my counterparts at Fort Belvoir and Quantico are now working 48 straight hours, and then they're off 72. Now, since I've been retired since 1998, my folks back in 1998 couldn't get along for 24 hours. I don't know how in the world they get along with each other now for 48 straight hours. But the union decided that's the way they wanted to go, so that's how they maneuvered that. So Shelton Shop was started around 2008, and we rebuilt the building in 2020. There was modular construction. Okay, so I've been involved in the Institute of Fire Engineers now for about 15 to 20 years, so that means I'm a glorified nothing. But modular construction is not what pleases me from the engineering standpoint. And unfortunately, we've got a number of those modular constructions sitting in our schools. Problem with modular construction, one way in, one way out. Not the safest thing you want to put little people in. So in the foreseeable future, we will be building a station at Embry Mills. It's in the planning stage. It's in what you call the Capital Improvement Program. So what does that mean? That means that we're going to take a little bit of your tax money here, and a little bit here, and a little bit here, and we'll build another station that by that time will probably cost $15 million. And then we'll put an $800,000 pumper in there, $1 million aerial, and an ambulance that's going to cost $250,000 to $300,000. And then we're going to have to pay people to staff it. So, as I said, you know, we're over 17,000 calls now. This year we'll probably go over 18,000, but you want that ambulance and that pumper to respond. Pretty important. Next slide, please. Our rescue stations, the first one was in 1972, and some of you may remember the name Al Fagan. Was a member of the Board of Supervisors, but Al was very proactive in getting that volunteer rescue squad here at the courthouse. Because prior to that, for 40 or 50 years, Fredericksburg Rescue ran the whole southern end of the county. And it wasn't until we established career staffing in our volunteer world there in White Oak and Hartwood and other places that Fredericksburg kind of was pushed out and the county began to take everything over. Rock Hill was established in 1980, Mountain View in 82, Aquia Harbor in 1989, White Oak in 1991. Unfortunately, Stafford Rescue disbanded in 2018 and became part of that career operation on Station 2. Next slide. This is a part that, as a manager, as a fire chief, that we all regret. This is what's referred to as a line of duty death. We've had 2 in Stafford County involving fire and rescue. We've also had 2 involving law enforcement. And nothing bothers a chief anymore than losing a person. From my standpoint as a chief, I've had to notify some of my employees that their brother, their mother, their father has passed away. But nothing hits home anymore than losing someone in an active response. John Garnett Sullivan, April the 4th, 1956, Falmouth Volunteer Fire Department, motor vehicle accident. Garnett was about 3 weeks away from getting married. Got a call, and he happened to be at the intersection of Route 1 and Butler Road. He tried to jump onto the apparatus.
Oh, no.
He fell underneath the wheels of the tanker 3 weeks before he was to be married. Israel Rodriguez, January 28, 1998, Rock Hill Rescue. One of those days that you're going to run calls, but you had snowstorms and those things. Motor vehicle accident went off the road and Izzy passed. So that's part of the tough stuff that we have to deal with in line of duty. And I don't need to tell you, law enforcement is suffering the brunt today. It's not uncommon, almost every week, you hear about a law enforcement officer killed. But a lot of times you don't hear about a firefighter or an EMT passing because it doesn't make news. Law enforcement makes news. So we lose anywhere from 65 to 80 firefighters every year. We are memorializing 15 line of duty deaths in the Commonwealth of Virginia next month. All of those weren't killed in fires. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, we have what's called a heart-lung cancer presumptive. If they die and we can tie that into the vocation, then they are considered heart-lung cancer presumptive. And they are recognized on our memorial at the governor's office. Next slide, please. So, I'll ask you if you've got any questions, but I want you to see that caveat there. And in my 50-plus years in being in this business, Stafford County has one of the best volunteer career combination fire and rescue departments in the Commonwealth. One of the things that we have achieved over the years is that insurance rating of ISO 3. So you say, okay, engineer person, what does that mean to me? It means that you ISO 3, you get a cheaper insurance rate. And if you were to install a sprinkler system in your house, which I did in 1989 when I moved to Hartwood, my sprinkler system was paid for within 7 years, and I saved $200 per year on my insurance. So if you look at this place in here, you'll see sprinklers in here. And I foresee that in the next 10 years, residential sprinkler protection is going to be mandatory throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. Just something to think about. Questions? I know I've monopolized probably about 35 or 40 minutes, but I wanted to give you an insight, and either Mark or Bill can come back on another day and specifically talk about what Mountain View did and what Brook did, because they're just as instrumental as the rest of us in making fire and rescue what it is. Yes, ma'am.
I live in Hartwood, and we have
God bless you.
we have a dry hydrant. Explain to me what that means, because I know we don't well a septic out there. So
A dry hydrant is something that also gives you insurance credit. And when you get ready to pay your insurance bill, you should ask them, are you aware that we have a dry hydrant in the area? A dry hydrant means there's no water on the hydrant, but the fire department comes, connects to the steamer, 4.5 connection, and they draft. So that's just like a fire hydrant, but it's not wet all the time. That's the reason it's called a dry hydrant.
So, but when they come to, if hopefully I have no fire, but if they come there, they're going to be bringing a big tanker, I assume.
Well, we will run a tanker task force also, but we'll also assign a pumper to that dry hydrant. So dry hydrants have one problem. It's contingent upon the weather in the area. If you're talking about Curtis Lake, you know, there's 2 dry hydrants on Curtis Lake. But Curtis Lake has a tendency during the heated part of the summer to go down, and then it exposes the piping that's underground, and sometimes you catch fish. So we had some pumpers that did their drafting, and it's kind of bad for a centrifugal pump to be digesting fish.
Ours is on Walden Pond, and on the other side is Lake Moody. So on Walden Pond Street, there's Lake Moody on this side and Walden Pond on that side.
Well, we have a dry hydrant on Lake Mooney also, and you also have an 18-inch water main that transverses from Mooney into the southern end, and we're getting ready to expand that to a 24-inch to accommodate the north end And if you're aware, we took Able Lake offline as a water purification plant, and in all probability in the next 10 years or so, maybe quicker than that, we'll have to put Lake Able back online because too many people are moving to Stafford.
As long as I can sell their houses or sell them a house, I'm okay with it.
But when you get ready to pay your insurance, ask them if they're aware that you have a dry hydrant in your area.
I will. Thank you.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, with the very first, I don't know what you call the tankers that you first had, did you go to the Rappahannock River to fill them up, or how did you get the water?
Sure. We used ponds. We've used swimming pools. We've used the Rappahannock. Bill and them have used the Potomac. They got this cute little piece of apparatus called a fireboat. And it's got a pump on it, and they can actually draft out of the Potomac. If the Potomac is not too nasty, but you know how that goes. So there's different avenues of getting water. But that was a problem in the early years. We didn't have a water supply.
Yeah.
And we made some great enhancements with a tanker shuttle system. Building them have a tanker, marking them have large water capacity. We've got water that's now throughout Stafford County. Just because you see a fire hydrant, there's always a concern on how the flow characteristics are. The very first question that I ask any developer, as I sat on the planning commission, is what are the flow characteristics that you're building this subdivision? The very first question I ask. And the engineer says, why are you worried about that? I said, well, I spent about 50 years in fire protection, so I'm a little concerned to make sure that those 499 townhouses you're building, that there's going to be adequate water there for them. Any other questions? Thank you for your time. Oh, go ahead, Rick.
Do you have any idea what happened to the old 38 Cadillac?
Unfortunately, I do. I was born and raised on Forbes Street in downtown Falmouth, and some folks called it Hogtown. But there was a place called Roy's Used Car Parts.
Yeah.
And the president of Falmouth Fire Department was Tom Key. And once that unit was disposed of, it sat in Roy's Used Car Parts for probably 25 to 30 years until we started crunching cars. And so that's what happened to that particular unit there. If you're not familiar with where Roy's Used Car Parts is, it's pretty much at the intersection of Harrow Road and Forbes Street. And they dump petroleum products on the ground there probably for 50 or 60 years. And so now we are now building $800,000 houses on what's called the Reserve at Clearview.
Yes.
So one of these days, and this is just Billy speaking, one of these days they'll have their own oil well there. Now, the group that's put them in there are now 20-some houses under construction. And for years and years on Forbes Street, people complained about the noise from the RF&P.
Yeah.
Of course, they don't call it RF&P anymore. They call it CSX or VRE. So those folks that live in or near the railroad tracks constantly complain about noise. Would you believe the Reserve at Clearview is going to go all the way down to the railroad tracks?
Yes, it is.
And do you think they're going to put a noise barrier there?
No.
Absolutely not.
Jesus, not doing that.
So those folks that live in and around Forbes Street, you always get that shaking when the RF&P went by. So, but that's progress. And we're going to see a lot more progress in Stafford County. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, on Centerport Parkway, we are now getting ready to build and approve 499 townhouses. And they were by right. What does that mean? That means that back in 1989, when Ferris Bellman, Alvin Vandy, and Mr. Smith and John Porter signed the piece of paper, it became residential. That was before Roger Staubach even did his thing. So, but there are going to be 499. But when you take a look, And I'll give you an example, since you live in Hartwood. We have 2,200 houses, residential occupancy approved for Hartwood that we can't stop. They're by right. Hopefully they won't materialize.
I think some of them are being built around the other side of the lake from me. I can
Well,
see them clearing it.
we got one development at the intersection of Poplar Road and Stony Hill.
Yeah.
That was a 500-acre tract of property that we're now going to put 90-some houses on it. So the guy that had that was a airline pilot, Croker, I believe is his name. So, Crocker. All of his property is being developed. His sons and grandsons saw visions of grandeur. So they got rid of it. And that's what's happening to most of our farms in Stafford. So we're seeing a lot of rural property, agricultural property being developed as residential properties. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention and hope if you need anything from me, let me know. I'm in downtown Hartwood, but don't have any fires.
I don't want any. I'm on well and septic out there.
They still got a good group of folks. Thank you very much.
For those, don't go yet, because I have a little something for you. For those of you that don't know, we're trying to get a museum for Stafford County. And so every year we have a new ornament. We have over 20 of them now, don't we? And this is the one, the newest one, and it's of the Rappahannock